All right, well, good morning, everyone. I don't know if it's good to be back on camera. It reminds me of some good, some less good memories. Sorry for not being able to be with you this morning. My daughter's been sick a bit all week, so we're not sure if our son is going to catch it. We're not sure if we're going to catch it. So we also had a pretty crazy week. So we've decided that it was probably best for me just to record myself so that we would do it this way. So this morning I want to talk to you about someone who got sick, and this person, however, was miraculously healed. And not just one person, actually, it was 10 people who were miraculously healed. The passage this morning is in Luke 17, starting in verse 11. Luke 17, starting in verse 11. So we're going to read starting at verse 11 and 12. It says, "On the way to Jerusalem, he was passing along Samaria and Galilee. As he entered a village, he was met by 10 lepers." So we see that Jesus was going through a village. He sees 10 lepers. Now, what's a leper? I know that it's not a word that we use a lot these days. What's a leper? So it seems to be something that people who would have read this text back then would have known what it was. Well, a leper was someone who had leprosy. So leprosy was a disease. So today it's known as Hansen's disease. So it's a disease that still exists today. So it's a disease that starts on the skin, generally on the face, and then it'll spread to the whole body and attack the nervous system. So I have a few images to show. If you have you don't like gross images, you can look away for a second. So here's a few images. So the first one, as you can see, there's a few spots on the skin. That's how leprosy starts. So we can see here it's on somebody's arm. So few little spots. It doesn't look like it's too bad at the moment, but that's how it starts, and it spreads. So we also have a few images of some people who have it on their face. It becomes very serious, very apparent. It spreads. It's pretty flagrant. And then after that, since it attacks the central nervous system, people start losing feeling, particularly in the hands. And sometimes just even like a little wound, a little injury, they won't even feel it. So sometimes the people, they can try and pick something up, they'll try and pull on it hard, and if the hand breaks or the fingers break, they won't even feel it. They'll have trouble healing. And then back then it was even worse, because when you had infections, they didn't have antibiotics, so it never even healed. So on the following image, we see somebody who has a kind of a hook hand. The fingers are starting to fall off. And that's what happened with these people. Their hands, their fingers all ended up falling off. And the final image, we see that you have hands that the fingers are falling off. And with time, that's what happened. And people often died from this, not really from leprosy. What ended up killing them was all of the wounds, the infections. That ended up being the thing that killed people. It wasn't even leprosy itself that killed people. It was everything that came with it. It's kind of like AIDS today. Today we say that AIDS isn't really the thing that kills you. It's that kills your immune system, and then eventually you just catch a cold and it kills you. It was kind of like that with leprosy. It wasn't the leprosy itself that killed you. It killed your nervous system, and then just one little injury, and when it got infected, that ended up killing you. So that's what leprosy was. It was a very contagious disease, a very serious disease. So leprosy was a very contagious disease. So now, that being said, to avoid you having nightmares tonight, thinking, oh, well, what if I have leprosy? What if I catch it? Today, there is a remedy. Since 1981, there is a remedy for it. So now in our Western countries, we have a way of treating it. We're not in danger. We can be treated pretty easily. The disease itself, though, still exists. Now, in poorer countries, people can still catch it. When people can't be treated for it, it can still get serious. People can still die from leprosy today. In our countries, though, if you catch leprosy, you can go get treated pretty quickly back when it's still spots on your skin before it gets too serious. And you'll be treated, you'll get over it pretty quickly, and you won't have any serious issues with it. So just so you sleep well tonight, don't worry about leprosy nowadays. That's probably why we don't talk about it as much in our countries today. So back then, though, it was a very dangerous disease. It was a very contagious disease. And back in Jesus' day, it was practically a death sentence. When you had leprosy, your life was over. Old Testament law had a lot of instructions concerning this disease in Leviticus 13. So we won't read the full chapter. The entire chapter talks about a lot of different skin diseases. But back then, the way that it worked was that someone who would have a wound or some kind of spot on their skin, they had to be examined by the priest. Now, the priest didn't necessarily have a formal medical training, but back then that was about as good as it got because nobody had formal medical training. So the priest was the person who was designated to examine the wound. So the priest would measure the wound. I don't know if maybe he drew like a little circle around the wound, and then he would see if it was going to spread. And the person would be put in isolation for a few days, and then after the isolation, we would check it to see if the wound had spread. And then after that, if there was a confirmation that it was indeed leprosy, the leper was declared unclean, and they had to be isolated for the rest of their life. We would say, okay, this person has leprosy, you're unclean, you're going to spend the rest of your days in isolation. We see in Leviticus chapter 13, verse 45, the leprous person who has the disease shall wear torn clothes and let the head of his hair hang loose, and he has covered his upper lip and cry out, unclean, unclean. He shall remain unclean as long as he has the disease. He is unclean, should be clear. He shall live alone. His dwelling shall be outside the camp. So it's very, very strict. Now you might think, well, that's pretty sad. I mean, the person has to be outside the camp, has to be in isolation for the rest of their life. I mean, yeah, that is sad. It's the reality. It is sad. And you might think it's even cruel. Maybe. But remember, it's to protect people. It was a safety measure. It was to protect people who were around. It was a very serious disease, a very contagious disease, a deadly disease. And it was an uncurable disease. The only way to protect people who were healthy, people around, it was to isolate the people who had leprosy. So yes, it is sad, but the alternative is to let leprous people just continue to live their life and contaminate everyone around them and then just ravage the entire population. So really, that's not a workable solution, just to let the disease run. So these people that was the only solution. They had to go be in isolation, and their life as they knew it was over. So after that, we see in verse 12, at the end of the verse 12, it says that as they stood at a distance, so we see that they stood at a distance to talk to Jesus, just like the law prescribed. They stood far away to talk to Jesus. So the law said that they had to stay away. So these guys are legitimately lepers. They're staying away to be able to talk to Jesus, and they have to yell to talk to him because that's the only thing they can do. They can't just go up and pat him on the shoulder. No, they have to stay away, yell to him. Now, I know that some of you might during the pandemic, you said, oh, back in my day, we didn't have social distancing. Well, yes, it existed. Even back in Jesus' day, it existed. They stood at two meters away even before it was cool. And then we see in verse 13, they asked Jesus, for Jesus to have pity on them. It says in verse 13, Jesus, Master, have mercy on us. They didn't ask, Jesus, please please heal us. They just said, Jesus, have mercy on us. So what we see here is that these guys are desperate. These men are cut off from their families forever, from their friends, from their work. They're condemned to live in poverty for the rest of their life. The only people that they're allowed to be around they're not necessarily their friends. It's not necessarily their colleagues. It's people who are going through the same kind of misery as they are. So it's a disease that really brought people together in their misery. The only thing that these people had in common, before start thinking, well, okay, these are all a nice band of brothers. No, the only thing that they had in common was the misery that they were going through. Then after that, in verse 14, it says that Jesus answered them. When he saw them, he said to them, "Go show yourselves to the priests." So it says, "Go show yourselves to the priests." So Jesus told them to go see the priest, which is something that's pretty logical, because if these guys were to be healed, it had to be attested to by the priest. The priest had to declare them clean. So at this point, the lepers could have said, "Oh, okay, here's another person who doesn't care about us. Jesus sees us and he didn't even come close to us. He just said, go see the priest, go away. Don't come close to me." And Jesus certainly could have gone to them and touched them. He didn't have any reservations about touching quote-unquote unclean people. In the story of the woman who had blood losses, she would have been considered unclean, and yet Jesus goes and touches her. He has no problem with that. Jesus is not made unclean by people who are unclean. So Jesus could have gone and touched them. He had done that before to heal people. So the lepers could have said, "Oh man, he just wants to get rid of us. He just wants to send us on our way. Why didn't he come close to us? Why didn't he do this, just like he did with everyone else that he supposedly healed? Why doesn't he do for us what he did for everyone else?" That's the way he always does things. He goes, he touches them, and he heals them. So it kind of reminds me of a scene in Chronicles of Narnia, the second movie, or the second book, if you're more used to the books. If you don't know of Narnia, it's a series of stories written by C.S. Lewis, which has a lot of imagery that represents the story of redemption and Jesus Christ. A lot of things that represent Jesus, like the lion, which is Aslan, who's the great hero of the story. He represents Jesus. At one point, he even gives his life for one of the main characters, one of the little kids. He dies. He even comes back to life, just like Jesus. So the lion is really perfect in everything that he does. And in the second movie, the kids are in trouble. And actually, I'm going a bit too fast. In the first movie, there's a big battle. Aslan, the big lion, he arrives as the hero. Last second, he saves everybody in the battle. And then in the second movie, it's kind of the same thing. There's a big battle, and all the kids are like, "Oh well, look, there's a big battle. He's gonna come. He's gonna come at the last second." But then Aslan doesn't show up. He doesn't do the same thing as he did last time. And then a little bit later, there's one of the little kids, the little girl named Lucy. She ends up seeing Aslan, and then she says, "Why didn't you jump in and save us like last time?" And Aslan answers, "Things never happen the same way twice, dear one." And it kind of reminds me of that. Sometimes we think that God will always do the same thing as he did last time. Where we think, "Oh God, last time you did the same, this is how you did it, this is how you saved me. Last time, this is what you did for me." But sometimes he won't do the same thing he did last time. Sometimes he does that to grow our faith in him. And then after that, we see in verse 14, the second half of verse 14, it says, as they were going to see the priest, they were cleansed. They were healed. So that's pretty crazy. Jesus didn't have to touch them. He didn't have to lay hands on them to heal them. He just told them to go somewhere, and they were healed. I love how Jesus does things differently every time. There's no magic formula. There's no magic spell that he needs to say. It's easy. He just tells them what to do. He stays far away, tells them to do something, and they're healed on the way. And then after that, in verse 15, we see that only one of them came back to thank Jesus, though. Then one of them, when he saw that he was healed, turned back, praising God with a loud voice. And he fell on his face at Jesus' feet, giving him thanks. So only one of them came back to thank Jesus. And then we see at the end of verse 16, it says, now he was a Samaritan. And just so that you would understand, a Samaritan was disgusting for a Jewish person. Samaritans were descendants of Jews who had mixed with some Assyrian people many years before. They were seen as kind of half-breed, half-baked Jews. They were a complete abomination. A Samaritan was worse than a non-Jew. There was a lot of racism, extreme racism, real prejudice toward those people. Even Jews who would be traveling, who would normally go through Samaria, to be able to go through Judea to Samaria, the fastest way would be to go straight to Samaria. The Jews would go around Samaria to not have to go through Samaria, not to have to see the Samaritans. They really hated them. It's kind of like how Ontarians who want to go to the Maritimes, they'll go through the States to avoid Quebec, just because they don't want to see those stupid Quebecers. And so it was kind of like that. There was a lot of prejudice, a lot of racism between Jews and Samaritans. If we had told this story to a Jewish person back then, the Jewish would have said, oh my goodness, that's so gross. A Samaritan, oh, barf, disgusting. And yet, the one who came back to thank Jesus, it was a Samaritan. I don't know why it's him and not the others. That's actually what Jesus asks in the following verse. Verse 17, it says, then Jesus answered, were not 10 cleansed? Where are the 9? Was no one found to return and give praise to God except this foreigner? And he said to him, rise and go on your way. Your faith has made you well. And why is it the Samaritan and not the 9 others? I think that's probably because the Jews, being Jews, they thought, well, I deserve it. I deserve it. I'm part of God's chosen people. Their first reflex in seeing that they were healed was to do a bunch of other things. Probably went to see their families. Probably wanted to go see their friends. Wanted to go find their lives. That was what was important to them. I don't know exactly what they did, but what we do know was that they didn't come to Jesus. They had other more important things to do. So those guys probably thought, well, I don't deserve to have leprosy. I'm part of God's chosen people. I don't deserve this misery. I deserve my old life with my family, with my friends. And now that Jesus has given this back to me, I'm going to go back to the life that I deserve. The Samaritan, on the other hand, he knew what the Jews thought of him. He knew that if Jesus had healed him, it was because Jesus was someone exceptional. someone who deserves to be worshipped and adored. And that's why he came back to see Jesus and to worship him. And then look at verse 19. What did Jesus say to the Samaritan? He says, your faith has made you well, or your faith has saved you. And I don't know about you, but personally, I feel like I missed something. I think, the Samaritan, he came back to thank Jesus. And he comes back and he says, okay, thank you, Jesus, for healing me. And Jesus says, your faith has saved you. How does Jesus know that the Samaritan has faith? Because the Samaritan just said thank you. And then it's like he went from thanking him to having faith, saving faith. I believe that it's because only the people who have faith in Jesus will thank him. Only people who have faith in Jesus will thank him. The other 9 were healed, but they were not saved. They were unbelievers who were healed, which is pretty crazy. They had healing of their body, but not the healing of their soul. The most important healing is the healing of the soul. And the healing of the soul is what the Samaritan had. So in conclusion, as I mentioned, thankful people are people of faith. And people of faith are thankful. This is what this story shows us. And I know it's Thanksgiving weekend. We're all going to talk about what we're thankful for, what we're thankful to God for. And it's important to be thankful toward God. But just remember, it's only people who have faith in God who are thankful to Him. People who don't have faith in God, they can be thankful, but not toward God. If you've talked to somebody who's not a Christian and you ask them, are you thankful? And they'll probably say, oh, sure, yeah, there's a lot to be thankful for. We live in a great place. We live in a nice country. We have nice things. We have lots of liberties. And so we're thankful for that. And you might say, well, who are you thankful to? And they say, oh, I'm thankful toward life. I'm thankful toward the universe. And that doesn't mean much. But to be thankful toward God, you have to have faith in God. So people who are thankful are people of faith. And so thankful people are people of faith, and people who have faith are thankful. So let's show that we have faith in God this weekend, by being thankful. I also want to mention that Jesus is the hero of the story. Now, some of you might read the story and think, wow, the Samaritan leper, he was really cool. I want to be like him. But no. The hero of the story is Jesus. When you watch a movie like Star Wars, I'm a big fan of Star Wars. You don't finish the movie by saying, wow, C-3PO is so cool. I would so much want to be C-3PO. But no, if you know Star Wars, C-3PO is a loser. He doesn't contribute much. The heroes of the story is Luke Skywalker, the Princess Leia, Han Solo, even R2-D2. Not C-3PO. Well, you want to be like the hero of the story. And here the hero of the story is Jesus. The Samaritan did something good, but he's not the hero. The hero of the story is Jesus. Think about it. Jesus healed 10 guys knowing that 9 of them weren't going to thank him. Really think about that. Jesus knew that 9 guys were not going to thank him. And he still healed them. That's still pretty crazy. I don't know about you. I'm thinking about, sometimes when I was young, if I would go do an activity with my dad, he'd take us to go somewhere, spend a bunch of money. And he'd say, what do we say? And then I'd say, thank you. But then, if we forget to say thank you, then, Dad gets mad. Dad's not happy. I don't know if you had parents like that. And some parents are like that, they make you feel like, oh, I shouldn't have even done that activity with you. You didn't even thank me. I shouldn't have brought you. I regret bringing you to the zoo because you didn't even thank me. And there's some parents that are like that. And it's not really nice to be like that. Jesus really isn't like that. 9 guys out of 10 didn't even thank him for changing their lives, and Jesus healed them anyway. That is love on a level that we don't understand. These guys weren't even going to believe in him. They weren't going to have faith in him. They weren't even going to raise their little finger to thank him, and he still healed them. That is an incredible example. And we often think like the Jewish lepers, but we're like the Samaritan leper. What I mean by that is that often when difficulties come, we think like the Jewish lepers. We think, I don't believe this. I don't deserve being a leper. I don't deserve this. If only Jesus could do a miracle so that I could get out of this. If only Jesus could do something for me so that I can find my old life. And our goal often in requesting a miracle is not that Jesus would be glorified. It's just for us to find our comfort. I'll say that again. Our goal in requesting a miracle from God is not that God be glorified. It's for us to find our comfort. Often that's what we want. We request healing from our disease, not so that God would be glorified, so that when we tell everyone, we ask God for it just because it's uncomfortable. We're tired of being sick. We want God to reduce the interest rate on our mortgage because it costs us $300 more than it used to. I say that because it's kind of a situation that I'm going through right now. We want the interest rate on our mortgage to go down, not so that we can be more generous with our money, but no, because we don't want the stress. We don't want to have to work longer hours. We want God to intervene in our marriage too, not so that we can glorify him and be the image of the love between Christ and his church for the people around us. No, we want that because we're tired of having conflict in our home. It's not fun. And then if God gives us our miracle, we often do like the Jewish lepers. We ignore God. We're happy to find our normal life, and then we don't even thank him. We should realize that we're like the Samaritan leper. We're people who don't deserve to be in God's family. We're not people who are part of God's chosen people. We're not people who have done anything to impress God. That's what the Samaritan leper realized. He never did anything to impress God. He never did anything to deserve what God did for him, but God gave everything for him. Jesus saved our soul. He healed our soul by giving himself on the cross for us. So we are like the Samaritan leper who doesn't deserve anything, but Jesus gave us everything anyway. And finally, let's thank Jesus for what he's done for us. In this Thanksgiving weekend, it's important not only to be thankful, but also to be thankful toward the right person. We don't want to be part of the people who say, thank you to life, thank you to the universe for giving me all these nice things that I enjoy. I certainly know a lot of people that are like that. But think about how insulting that to God that must be, to hear, oh, thank you to the universe. Just to give you an example, imagine if you bring your kid to Disney World. You go for a really nice weekend or a nice week, and you spend all kinds of money, and at the end, and you tell your kid, what do we say? And the kid says, thank you. And the kid adds, thank you to God, thank you to life, thank you to the universe. And you would be insulted. You would say, hey, no, I paid for this. I worked hard. Say thank you to me. You'd be hurt. When we say thank you to life, when we don't say thank you to God directly, when we send empty thank yous just out there to no one in particular, it's insulting to God. It's important to thank God himself for everything that he's given us. It's important to thank him in all things and all times, particularly this weekend. Let's glorify God this weekend out loud, just like the Samaritan. Let's recognize that he's given us all things on this weekend. And now we're going to take a time where we're going to share all the things that we're thankful for. So we're going to do that together this morning, and hopefully God will be glorified, and we'll try to do that all week. So thank you. It's good to be with you. I hope to be in person with you next time. Have a good week.